Dear participants and colleagues, I will now speak for 15 minutes about the coconut reproductive biology and some related issues for farmers.
First, I will give an overview of the biology of reproduction of the coconut palm as a whole. Then, I will describe the inflorescence and its male and female flowers. I will talk about the female and male phases of the inflorescences. The duration of these phases is important because it determines whether the coconut palm will self-fertilize, or whether the coconut palm will breed with another nearby coconut palm. Finally, I will tell stories of islands and coconut, in particular how coconut palms reproduce in difficult conditions, on very isolated islands. Sometimes, according to Polynesian tradition, coconut palms manage to create islands.
Here is a magnificent Tahitian red dwarf planted in the International Collection for Africa and the Indian Ocean. This collection is located in Ivory Coast. It should be noted, however, that even more beautiful Tahitian red dwarf can be found among farmers, in the gardens of the Tuamotus. Here is an inflorescence that has recently opened. This inflorescence will be fertilized. Then it will gradually grow into a mature coconut bunch. Once fertilized, the female flowers will gradually grow bigger and become coconut. At 3 months, the young fruits reach the size of a fist for most of the tall-type coconut palms. They are a little smaller for varieties producing a large number of small fruits like this Tahitian dwarf. The 3-month-old coconut are carried by the leaf numbered 14, the rachis of which is horizontal. Knowing how to recognize this particular leaf is important, because it is used to harvest samples and as a reference point for carrying out certain counts. Even if the yield varies a little depending on the season, the coconut palm has a continuous production. It is frequent to find all the stages of development of the fruit on the same palms, scattered on 12 to 14 bunches, just open inflorescence, fruits of 1, 2, 3, 6, 8 or 12 months. From the opening of the inflorescence to the mature fruits, the complete development takes a full year. I was surprised to observe that, very often, farmers think that this development only takes 3 to 6 months. Maybe it's because they can't wait to harvest.
In the axil of each frond, there usually grows a pointed spathe, which increases progressively in size. When fully grown, the spathe is about 1 to 1.5 meters long and about 15 centimeters in diameter at its widest part. The pressure of the growing inflorescence from within causes the spathe to rupture near the tip on the ventral side. This split extends downwards. Once fully developed, the spathe splits open and releases the coconut inflorescence. The coconut inflorescence, called spadix by botanists, is 1 to 2 meter long. It consists of a central axis or rachis, with 10 to 50 lateral branches called spikelets, or raculae by botanist. The coconut inflorescence is monoecious. That means it have both male and female flowers. Each spikelet is about 30 to 55 centimeters long and bears 100 to 300 male flowers from the top down. Most of the spikelets, but not all, have 1 or more female flowers at their base. The total number of female flowers in an inflorescence is dependent on genetic and environmental factors and varies from 0, especially at the very first flowering, to a few hundred.
The male flowers are the first to open, beginning at the top of each spikelet and proceeding towards the base. The coconut inflorescence generally has several thousand male flowers. The male flowers are small of an oblong shape, usually of a pale yellow color, but with shade of green and orange in some varieties. Each male flower has 6 stamens. Male flowers start to mature as soon as the inflorescence opens. Their bracts open and pollen is released from the anthers. Opening usually occurs early in the morning with the flowers shedding pollen throughout the morning, before dropping off after midday. Flowers at the top of the inflorescence, as well as on the terminal region of each spikelet, tend to mature earlier. Duration of the male phase is about 20 days, but this may vary according to variety and season. In a male flower, each of the 6 anthers contains about 100,000 to 220,000 pollen grains. Each normal inflorescence produces approximately 200 to 300 million pollen grains. Coconut pollen grains are spherical, with a diameter of about 50 micrometers when fresh. They shrink rapidly after shedding and become ellipsoidal. When placed in water, the pollen grain immediately gets hydrated, regaining its spherical shape. Coconut pollen is marketable, if some farmers are interested to produce. The pollen has been reported to remain viable for 2 to 8 days in laboratory conditions. But in nature, 75% of shed pollen loses its viability after 12 hours. This point is important if we want to develop a pollination method that can be used by farmers.
The female flowers are globular in shape. Their diameter is 2 to 3 centimeters. These flowers become receptive early in the morning, as indicated by a reflexed and moist stigmatic surface. In addition to the stigmatic appearance, nectar containing 9 to 12% sucrose is produced from the receptive flowers throughout the day. When receptive, the stigma is expanded as 3 erect teeth. The stigmas remain receptive to pollen for 1 to 4 days before they dry up. Once pollination period is over, the stigma necroses, and you can see a black dot at the end of the flower, at the place of the stigmas. If fertilization is successful, the flower generally develops into a coconut. Although both wind and insects bring about pollination, insect pollination is more predominant. During the first 6 weeks from pollination, up to 70% of flowers fall off. At harvest time, or after 11 to 12 months from fertilization, an average fruit set of 30% or less is common. Installing honeybee colonies in coconut plantations and seed gardens for enhancing pollination and fruit set is beneficial. In French Polynesia, several farmers said that if the plantation is well maintained, the presence of hives for bees increases the harvest by 15 to 30%.
The sexuality of the plants is very inventive. So, each coconut palm is bisexual, and produces inflorescences bearing both female and male flowers. It can therefore pollinate itself. Most dwarf-type coconut palms reproduce in that way. In tall coconut palms, the pollination mechanisms are more complicated. To understand them, it needs to be known that the female phase of an inflorescence corresponds to the period when female flowers are receptive, and the male phase begins as soon as the inflorescence opens and ends when the last male flower falls. In some varieties, all the male flowers ripen and fall before the female flowers are receptive. In that case, cross-pollination takes place. It apparently involves 2 different parents. But another phenomenon further complicates this mechanism. It is also possible for pollination to take place between 2 successive inflorescences on the same palm. The female phase of a given inflorescence may partially coincide with the male phase of the following inflorescence. The coconut palm is therefore a species in which different reproduction options exist side by side.
Warning: this requires to be attentive. Coconut varieties are classified into 4 groups according to their mode of reproduction. Type 1, strict allogamy, short female phase with no overlap with the male phase of the same inflorescence, or with the male phase of the following inflorescence. Example is a unique population of the West African tall cultivar. Type 2, preferential allogamy, short female phase with no overlap with the male phase of the same inflorescence, but with partial, or rarely total, overlap with the male phase of the following inflorescence. Examples are the cultivars Tahiti tall, Rennell Island tall, Comoro Island tall, most West African talls, and some compact dwarfs. Type 3, direct orthogamy, long female phase completely overlapping with the male phase of the same inflorescence, with or without overlapping with the male phase of the following inflorescence. Examples are the cultivars Malayan yellow dwarf, Sri Lanka green dwarf and Cameroon red dwarf. Type 4, semi-direct orthogamy, short female phase partially overlapping with the male phase of the same inflorescence and with that of the following inflorescence. Examples are the Brazil green dwarf, and many dwarf by tall hybrids, and some compact dwarfs. In fact, we believe that a coconut palm is never strictly allogamous. The pollination mechanism must allow a palm to self-pollinate, sometimes during its life. This is essential to a plant propagated from a single seed that might float to an isolated beach. In Fakarava Atoll, we observed a small island on which was planted a single coconut tree, about 1 kilometer away from a source of pollen. This coconut tree was producing fruits. In the absence of fertilization, the palm may accelerate the emission of its inflorescences. Some inflorescences can then be pollinated by the next inflorescence of the same coconut tree. Thus, the coconut tree succeeds to reproduce, even if it is alone.
Now, I will tell how a coconut palm can create an island. In 2009, the French Initiative for Coral Reefs funded a scientific survey on the atoll of Fakarava, in Tuamotu, French Polynesia. At this time, Mr. Cyril Shonfo I, said Tahira, was president of the Association of the Biosphere Reserve of the municipality of Fakarava. Tahira indicated that for the Polynesian, a motu is defined as a small island on which vegetation grows. A rock islet and a sandbar without any vegetation are not called motu. Tahira observed some sandbanks becoming small motu over a number of years. According to him and some other inhabitants of Fakarava, the coconut tree can create a motu. Tahira explained that coconuts brought by sea germinate on a sandbar that is not yet stabilized. If the coconuts succeed in germinating and growing, birds come to rest on the young coconut palms. On their feathers or in their droppings, the birds carry seeds that are deposited on the sand around the coconut. Bird droppings enrich the soil. In most cases, only a single coconut palm manages to survive to adulthood. Gradually, vegetation grows at the foot of the palms. The palm's roots and the other plants contribute to stabilizing the sandbar and provide purchase for other coconut seedlings and other seeds to germinate and flourish. Then the size of the motu progressively increases.
What is the related challenge for coconut farmers? In my opinion, farmers must appropriate scientific knowledge on the coconut reproductive biology. The breeding carried out by the farmers is often not very effective, because they do not control the reproduction of their coconut trees. When we harvest a seed nut from a coconut tree, we know the mother of this seed nut, but we do not know who its father is. This father can be a good parent or a bad parent, or even the coconut tree itself in the case of self-fertilization. Some scientists use a method, 100% reliable, of controlled fertilization with bagging of the inflorescence. But this method is very expensive, difficult to implement, and gives a very low yield. We believe that farmers should use simpler methods of controlled pollination with bagging, even if these simple methods are only 60 to 90% reliable. It will already be a huge progress if farmers have such methods. We will try to test some of these possible methods during the field sessions of this training.
Dear participants and colleagues, thank you for listening. On my website, coconutmuseum.org, I have collected many botanical drawings, some of them amusing, classified under a heading Whimsical Botany. Some European botanists, centuries ago, drew coconut trees without even having seen them. Coconuts that exist only in dreams.